Hello and welcome back to Book Club of One. Today we're covering Chapter 6 of Hayek's Constitution of Liberty. If you've never seen this show before, don't worry about it. You're good to stick around. These episodes are self-contained. We're going to be doing a meditation, really, on the themes Hayek covers in this chapter, which are the ideas of equality, merit, and value. But it's not going to tie in too much with the other chapters. So, you should be good. In this chapter, Hayek is basically considering various theories of distributive justice and how things should be distributed in society in order for things to be just. The first one he considers is equality, and then later on he'll consider two theories, one of value and one of merit. Now, first, when considering equality, Hayek isn't taking the conservative position. He's not saying, I believe in equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. If you think about it for longer than a couple of seconds, you realize pretty quickly that the conservative and progressive position on equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome really very quickly reduced the same thing. Imagine how much intervention in the economy you would have to do in order to assure everybody the exact same opportunities. When you're born, if you have wealthy parents, well, now you have more opportunities because one day you're going to inherit the extra money they have. Unless you get rid of all inheritance, institute a 100% death tax, institute high gift taxes so parents can't give their children wealth, well, you haven't guaranteed equality of opportunity. Until you say we're going to abolish all private schools and stop wealthy parents from sending their kids to specialized schools, until you abolish even not just that, you get rid of educational software for kids that's publicly available, that a parent can buy in order to help their kids get ahead in math or something. Until you get rid of that, you can't ensure equality of opportunity. Opportunities will be distributed unequally across society, differently, to different folks. So, I don't think those are things that conservatives are really for. And on the other side of things, certain things that iron out equality of outcome, conservatives tend to be for. So, let's think for a moment, what's the difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome? What do conservatives mean when they say we favor one and not the other? Well, equality of opportunity is really analogous to differences related to nurture, to society and the opportunities they're giving you and the impressions they give to you that cause you to become who you are and determine your social position. Whereas equality of outcome seems to be more in line with differences related to nature, not nurture. Right? Even if everyone has the same exact nurture, the same exact opportunities, there still might be differences due to differences between people, whether you boil it down to genetics or to the soul or whatnot. So when conservatives are saying we prefer equality of opportunity to equality of outcome, what they're really saying is we favor leveling out differences that are the consequence of nurture, but we don't support leveling out differences that are the consequence of nature. And of course, a lot of liberals will agree with that when they get presented with extreme examples. I shouldn't say liberals, I should say leftists. You have a ballerina who's great, has wonderful natural talent, that isn't due to nurture, but is just due to her genetics or due to something special about her. Well, suppose you could break her ankles and now she's going to be on the same playing field with other ballerinas, and it's only going to be her work and the effort she puts in that's going to determine whether she rises above or below them. Most left folks will say, oh, no, I don't support equality of outcome in that situation. But then you go to conservatives and you say something like, hey, certain folks who had the same opportunities in school and didn't do quite as well, maybe they have learning disabilities, should we have special education classes for them? And conservatives aren't going to object to that. They're going to be in favor of leveling out certain differences that are due to nature, not to nurture, imposing equality of outcome, not just equality of opportunities on people. So just as is so often the case, the left and the right really aren't that different on this. Equality of opportunity and equality of outcome, or leveling out differences that are due to both your nature and the nurture you received, or just leveling out differences due to nurture, it's really hard to disentangle what's what there. And there's also, as Hayek points out, no good moral reason to think that one sort of difference is that different than the other sort of difference. You didn't decide what your genes are going to be, what your nature is going to be, any more than you decided how you're going to be nurtured or brought up. So you're not any more morally culpable in that sense for who you are, regardless of nurture, than you would be for who you are with the nurture you received. So if there's not a moral difference there, what grounds do you have for saying we're in favor of equal opportunity but not imposing equal outcome? So, if the left and the right are the same, as they so often are, what's the classical liberal or libertarian alternative? Are we doomed to have to throw out the concept of equality altogether as a meaningful concept, or can we salvage it somehow? Well, we can salvage it by going back to what was probably originally meant by it. The Founding Fathers of the United States of America, when they wrote, "All men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights," what sorts of things did they have in mind? Well, they didn't like being taxed without being represented, because Englishmen, under the law, all had the same rights. No taxes imposed without being represented. And they were still Englishmen, they lived in a different spot. Now, they didn't demand that they wanted the same outcomes as folks living in England. They didn't demand that they wanted all the same opportunities as folks living in England. They just wanted the same rules applied to them as applied to folks living in England. What about having soldiers quartered in your home? Well, they just wanted the same laws applied to them that applied to folks who actually were in England proper. They weren't demanding, once again, everything to turn out the same for them, or for them to have all the special opportunities that came from living in England. Just the same laws applied to them. So this is what Hayek suggests we think of as a better conception of equality. Equality under the law. Having the same laws be applied to everybody, regardless of their class status, regardless of their racial status, anything like that. Same laws, no matter who you are. Now, could you have both? Could you both believe in equality of outcome and equality of opportunity, and at the same time equality under the law? And the answer is pretty clearly no. The two are mutually exclusive. You can have one, or you can have the other. If you're going to try to guarantee people all the same opportunities or all the same outcomes, well, you have to treat them differently. Because if you treat them the same, people are naturally going to have different results, because people are importantly different. They have different motivations, they have different skills and abilities, and I'm going to put a little thing up here, one of these two sides, a little bit later, linking to another video where I'm going to talk about this with a more pop culture spin. No spoilers, that video hasn't come out yet. But besides like the just vast differences between people that guarantee that treating them the same results in different outcomes, there's just luck involved. So that if you treat everybody the same, people are going to have different outcomes. Somebody's just going to get lucky and someone else isn't. But the only way to level out those differences is to treat people differently. And obviously the same is true in reverse. It's not just the case that if you treat everyone equally, you're guaranteed different outcomes. It's also the case that if you guarantee the same outcomes, you necessarily have to treat people differently. Converse is true for both. Okay, do we have a good reason then, since they're incompatible, to prefer the classical liberal conception of equal application of the law, equality under the law, to the left progressive perspective on equality, where we want everyone to have similar outcomes because it's unfair for them to have different outcomes on the basis of their way they were raised or their genetics, which are things that are outside of their control ultimately. And Hayek says there are good reasons. First off, there are extraordinarily practical reasons, the practical reasons he talks about all the time throughout the rest of the book. If you don't allow the way people decide to live their lives, what their goals are, how they pursue those goals, to have an impact on the outcome, right? You guarantee them the same outcome regardless of what their goals were, regardless of how they pursued those goals. Well, then you get rid of the fact that you can use those different outcomes to signal to people what different ways of living life lead to, right? You could have in a society 20 different people leading 20 different kinds of lives, or even more than that. And by looking at people and how they live their lives, people can make better decisions about which type of life they want to use. That's just a practical reason, like sort of a signaling reason. There's also other calculation sorts of reasons. People who are making decisions in their everyday life, if you guarantee them the same outcomes, they're not going to have the incentive to make the best use of the knowledge they have available to them to make good decisions. But also, when they're unable to see the consequences of their own decisions, they're unable to use knowledge and information available to them to make better decisions. But there's not just practical reasons. There are also reasons from, I'm going to say natural law, even though Hayek doesn't use that word. Hayek says, okay, we've been talking so far about moral conceptions of equality. We've been talking about what does it mean to say people are morally equal and we should guarantee that equality that should exist. Well, Hayek seems to think that our grounding for that moral equality should come from something in nature, come from looking at whether or not people are equal and how that equality manifests. And so Hayek says, all right, are people similar? Do they have some sort of interchangeable features or interchangeability between them? He says, no, of course not, obviously. People have very different goals, very different values, very different abilities and talents. So no two people can just be switched out with one another throughout society. They're very different. So there's not really a good natural law sort of grounding for guaranteeing people have equal outcomes, equal opportunities, right? Similar things guaranteed to them because of their inherent similarity. However, because of the vast diversity that exists between people, because people do have their own goals and that people are ends in themselves, he doesn't quite use this terminology, but because people do have their own goals and their own values, that gives us a good reason to respect those goals and those values and to not put in place special legal barriers to stop some people's goals from other people's, because their goals are just as valuable and meaningful as other people's. It doesn't give us a good reason to help certain people along by giving them special privileges or benefits legally that we wouldn't give to others, because their goals aren't any more important on the basis of their nature, because everyone's unique diversity is part of what gives them value. So Hayek seems to think, he doesn't again use the word natural law, but he seems to think that if you were to look at the way the world is, it seems to jive more with the equality under the law theory of what it means that everyone is created equal than the equality of outcome, equality of opportunity sort of theory. At this point, Hayek puts forward what he considers two unobjectionable principles that he thinks are just incompatible with egalitarian theories of justice. So the first of these principles is that no one possesses the capacity to determine conclusively the potentialities of any other human being. Nobody, no matter who they are, can hold in their head everything that someone else is capable of, or everything that someone else might come up with as a solution for a problem. Second principle Hayek presents here is that when someone acquires additional capacities or abilities that are of value for society, that is beneficial for society as a whole, even if it is detrimental for a specific person, right? So you come up with a great new way to make French fries that no one else has thought of before, and it's just way more efficient. Even if that puts some people who used to have jobs making French fries out of work, still a benefit as a whole for a society, that new ability that you came across. If someone comes up with a cure for cancer, even if that puts hundreds of doctors out of work because it's a simple cure, you just get a shot, and now we don't have oncologists anymore, still a benefit for society, even though it hurt specific individuals who make their living caring for those people in need. So those are his two sorts of principles, and he goes on to make a case that attempts to be egalitarian across society will fly in the face of one of those two principles. And so here's sort of the basic reason why. It's not clear at all that some of the advantages that certain people can get for themselves, becoming a doctor, learning this thing, learning that thing, or the other thing, it's not clear that we could provide all of those advantages for everybody in society. Right? It seems as though we have to provide them for some and not for others because there simply aren't the resources to send everyone to medical school or to make everyone a lawyer. It just doesn't seem to be something that's feasible. And secondly, it also doesn't appear clear that when we do allow certain people in society to gain certain advantages or benefits for themselves, like becoming a doctor or lawyer or whatever, that in some way stops other people from receiving those same advantages. So you can probably see how this is clashing with that second principle he brought up, right? If someone gaining additional capacities is a benefit for society as a whole in general, well then, when you try to even things out by diminishing the advantages that some people can receive, so that everyone receives similar advantages, only allowing people to get the advantages that we can give to everybody, well then, you diminish good for society as a whole, not just for the people who you stop from receiving special benefits. And again, secondly, it's not clear that by allowing certain people to have certain advantages, you're stopping other people from also gaining those advantages at another point in time. Okay. So like we were talking about at the beginning of this video, there are really two sources of inequality that are possible. There's differences that determine differences in outcome that are related to your nature, just who you are as a person, genetically speaking, or from your soul, or however you think that sort of thing works. And then there are differences that come from nurture, from the way you were raised, the society and culture you were born in, and the ethical system that you were raised in. Most people don't want to, as we said earlier, level out differences between folks due to nature. Even hardcore left-wing folks usually don't strive to do this because it tends to be impossible. Without giving people who have issues with school lots and lots and lots more time and attention, to the point where it would drain society as a whole, you can't necessarily bring everyone up to the same level. And you could try crippling some people who have natural benefits and advantages, but that seems bad. So most folks who want to even out differences focus on nurture. Now, Hayek is quite clear that there doesn't seem to be a good reason for this. It doesn't seem like you're any more deserving of natural differences than differences from nurture, but it does seem to be the case that folks recognize that differences due to nature shouldn't be leveled out. And so he sort of asks the question, what's the difference here? Why should we level out differences based on nurture but not differences based on nature? So here are some examples of differences between folks that are a result of nurture. So first, you've got geography. People are born in different parts of the world, different climates, and second, local morality and local culture. People born in different parts of the world with different cultures learn different moral rules, different things to value in their life, and that's going to result in differences in how they interact. Now, most people don't want to make the world entirely homogeneous and have the same culture everywhere, nor do they want to terraform the planet so that the geography that everyone grows up in is the same. They don't want everyone to grow up in cities or everyone to grow up on farms. They're okay with diversity created from those sources. The things they tend to focus on, or that tend to be focused on generally, are differences that are the result of your family that you're born into and how they raise you and educate you and teach you. Secondly, differences that are the result of inheritance that you might receive. And thirdly, differences in education between folks. And what he wants to show by going through these, with maybe the exception of the first one, the family, because he seems to be under the impression that just like with geography, just like with culture, just like with natural differences between folks, most people don't want to abolish the family, and they are quite happy with the institution of the family. But with the other two, what he wants to show is that they fly in the face of that second principle he put forward, that benefits that are gained by some people are good for society as a whole, and that it's not clear that by abolishing the mechanisms that create these differences, right, inheritance, education, that we would be able to secure those advantages to everybody across society without just destroying those advantages and the benefits they give to society as a whole. In a way, this is sort of a preemptive response to Rawls. You could see someone taking this, fleshing it out more, and just accepting Rawls's framework that inequality should be allowed insofar as they help the least worst off in society, but then say, hey, look, these sources of inequality actually have these mechanisms that benefit society overall. All right, so let's start off with the family as a whole. Hayek starts out by pointing out that benefits that a person gets because they were raised by a loving and caring mother and father, a household that just cares for them and raises them to be good people, it's not clear why those benefits, those good attributes they get, would be any less valuable than if the good attributes they got from being raised in a nice family they had gotten instead due to their genetics or their nature. Because it's clear that it's not less valuable, it seems odd why it should be considered less important for society that people get benefits from being in a family. For the same reason that you wouldn't want to stamp out differences between people that are based on who they are, on their soul or the genetics or whatever, you wouldn't want to stamp out differences between people that arise from their upbringing. Secondly, under this issue of the family, it's pretty clear that different families and different ways of being raised and different family traditions give different benefits. Somebody raised in a family who has one background and one culture will have different values and different preferences, different skills even than someone raised in another different family. But those differences are valuable to society. It would be bad if everyone had the same sort of background, because everyone has different skills and abilities that are all valuable to society and that in some cases are mutually exclusive. And thirdly, he wants to point out that the benefits you get from the family are sometimes cumulative across generations. If you were to just take a random two people, have them be married and have them develop their own traditions, then they have kids and they raise that kid with those traditions, the benefits that you might get from having a great-grandfather who came up with traditions, and then his son, the grandfather of this family, layered onto those traditions and added seasoning and age, and just as these traditions age, as generations pass on, they may gain something that you don't get just with a family's first generation. And so those benefits, because Hayek is, as we've said before, a very evolutionary thinker. So he thinks of this sort of almost like genetics. By combining different families and their traditions in different ways, you get different outcomes and different things from nurture that might benefit everybody as a whole by generating new combinations of features in people. And if you ever were to try to get rid of the family, you'd get rid of this issue. And so then he transitions into inheritance, and whether inheritance as an institution does similar things to the family. And the first thing he mentions is that allowing inheritance across generations is what facilitates that last thing we talked about with the family. As you pass through different generations of a family, allowing them to inherit something, maintain a certain standard across generations, maintain certain important things to the family, whether those be heirlooms or land that they live on or something like that, is necessary for those benefits that he established as arising from the family to take place. And by abolishing inheritance, you may be abolishing a lot of those strong benefits from having multi-generational families. Again, he points out here that it's not clear that being born to rich or wealthy parents is a significantly different additional opportunity you've been given in life than being born to smart parents or kind parents. Being rich is certainly different than being smart or kind, but it's not clear where the moral difference comes from in terms of the extra opportunities you had by being born to rich parents that you wouldn't have had if you had. It doesn't seem clear what the difference is between wealthy family and kind or intelligent family. Additionally, allowing inheritance across generations gives people the incentive to save money and to accumulate wealth. It lengthens the structure of production by giving people an incentive to not just spend everything before they die, because otherwise the state's going to take it away and they want to leave something for their kids. It allows investment to be longer term, and it gives people an additional incentive to save and grow the economy. I want to do another video on this at some point, but savings is so important for a society to grow and become wealthier and richer, and allowing inheritance facilitates that. Finally, allowing inheritance makes you able to not break up certain capital formations. If every time a family dies and their business is liquidated and given to everyone across society, you're destroying capital formations that are arranged in a certain way for a reason, and it makes society and its structure less stable. Finally, banning inheritance worsens nepotism in society. If you say, hey, you can't pass things on to your kids anymore, well then people who are wealthy and are connected are going to try to get their kids, whether they're qualified or not, wealthy and connected positions, since they can't leave them wealth. And so it leads to corruption in society to not allow privately owned things to be passed on, because then people will attempt to pass on publicly owned things illicitly, is essentially the theory and the idea here. Just everything that's bad about inheritance that you could come up with would be worse under a system where you completely get rid of inheritance, because you're trying to find other more important things than titles to property to pass on to people that will last once you're gone. And those will tend to be positions with high income. People are going to create positions that lend nothing to society, but that have a high income solely for this purpose. Trying to find your way around laws has a lot of negative consequences. Finally, is the issue of education. And he says, all right, so the question here is, we clearly can't make education available to everybody equally. Not everybody is going to be able to get a PhD in society. Not everybody should be able to get a master's, and going to school for that long is an enormous waste of societal potential and things that you could be doing with that time. So the question is, do you just decide with a test? You make it the rule that people who pass this test get free education, people who don't, and you weed out people and choose that way. Well, here's the issue. Enforcing equality in this way stops people from getting education who would otherwise receive it. You're telling certain people who could get it, if you didn't put this restrictive system in place, you can't get it. And it doesn't solve the problem of people who get this education making sure they're people who will use it well. You're still going to be giving people education on the basis of something that is not a good reflector of whether or not they're going to be beneficial to society. So it's better to have this being done in a private way, where people who are promising get scholarships, and those and again, he's going to have another chapter on this later in the book, and we'll talk about that then. But there are other solutions to this, and any sort of scheme that you would try to put in place is going to stop people from getting skills that are going to benefit society as a whole, and it's trying to hold in a specific person's mind what other people are capable and judge them on the basis of that, as opposed to having things being done organically. Hayek has one more attack against egalitarianism, or this right-wing, left-wing theory of equality. And this is that no one who really says they want egalitarianism or equality actually does. What they really want is fairness. Have you ever heard someone on the left wing say, "Wow, it's really not fair, is it, that CEO makes 4,000 times what you make? They didn't work 4,000 times as hard as you work." The implication, obviously, being that if the CEO did actually work 4,000 times as hard as you work, they would deserve it. And that in general, people deserve something that's roughly equivalent to how much they worked, how much they sacrificed. The argument isn't actually that people should be equal, but that we should have some sort of a meritocracy, where people are rewarded based on how much what they did was meritorious, was virtuous, was deserving of reward in some higher sense. They're not actually interested in egalitarianism. So this is that second sort of a theory that I said Hayek is going to talk about in this bit. He's going to talk about a theory of rewarding people in accordance with their merit, or how hard they worked, or how much they sacrificed, and whatnot. And he's going to compare this with the third and final theory, which is the one that he subscribes to, which is people being rewarded based on the value that they give to others. So let's talk about meritocracy versus a system of rewarding value. Before we do, let's mention one more thing. This sort of meritocratic view makes sense, right? We should reward people in proportion to how virtuous they are, how hard they work. Makes intuitive sense. Makes a lot more sense than people should just get the same amount regardless of their merit. Or everyone should receive the same opportunities no matter what they've done or how valuable those opportunities are to them, or individual people's choices. The meritocracy idea makes more sense. And Hayek thinks the only way you really get people sold on egalitarianism, as opposed to this meritocratic sort of view that he's going to take on now, is to appeal to their envy. He thinks that people in society have certain vices, and one of them is looking at what other people have that they don't have, and even if they're completely comfortable and well off and should be happy, seeing what other people have and wanting it. And you hear conservatives and folks say this a lot too, but I really do think it's true. I think a lot of the calls for social reform from folks on the left aren't actually focused on and dedicated to helping out people who really need it. They tend to be focused on helping the folks in the middle class who tend to be leftist. Forgiving student debt, for instance, is that going to help the really poor in society who couldn't go to college in the first place? No. It's going to help middle class white folks who went to college and are dealing with their college debt, like me. Now, that's not an example of this specifically, I suppose. But I think Hayek is generally right here, that in order to motivate egalitarianism, you need to tap into trying to justify people just looking at what others have and wanting it because they have it. And saying, oh, they shouldn't have that because I don't. Anyway, let's move on to this sort of meritocracy view and issues with that.